All right, we're going to go ahead and get the meeting started. I'm going to paste in the link to the agenda one more time here. And wanted to start off with the hot topic of the day, which is what's going on at the federal level. I certainly don't claim to be an expert on this, and so I just wanted to kind of share some of the things that I see going on. I try to pay attention to any official communications that come out. I also get the updates from NAFIPA, which is the MAS-FPS national level of the organization. I think that they have some really good materials that come out as well. We'll talk about MAS-FPS a little bit later. Um, so two things that I would share, again, take this with a grain of salt. At the state conference next month, MESFPS state conference next month, we're going to have the lawyers from Washington, D.C. here, and they're going to have much more definitive answers on this. But as we know, this is kind of a moving target right now. But a couple of things that I think that I feel fairly confident in sharing is that we did get a continuing resolution. So as you know, March 14th, there was going to be a government shutdown if there wasn't some work on the funding moving forward, and we did get a continuing resolution. And the good news about a continuing resolution is that usually they just take all of your current funding and move that forward while the resolution is going on. There was a few additional tweaks, but nothing to our formula grants. So that's Title 1, 2, 3, 4. There wasn't any tweaks to those grants. And so my understanding is it's a continuing resolution. That means they take last year's funding and they just push that forward. So what we may expect from that is flat funding from the federal sources. And that continuing resolution does go through September 30th of 2025. And so at that point, who knows what's going to happen? But as we're thinking about our consolidated applications and the sorts of funding that we might see there, we may expect to see flat funding for this year. I've also had a lot of people that are saying, well, I just heard Title 1 is going to get cut. I heard Title 3 is going to get cut, and those sorts of things. And so I was looking at the Department of Education reduction in force memo that came out recently, or excuse me, the press release about that. And it's pretty short, kind of interesting. But this paragraph here, I think, is very important. It says the Department of Education will continue to deliver on all statutory programs that fall under the agency's purview, including formula funding, student loans, Pell Grants for future special needs students and competitive grant making. So even with everything that's going on at the Department of Education, the formula funding predates anything that happened at the Department of Education. So they're the ones that are currently facilitating that funding. So anyway, it's saying here that they're going to continue to deliver on the funding. So that was one piece of evidence that was helpful for me to understand. And then the other piece is this piece about that continuing resolution, that likely that means flat funding. So those are a couple of things that I know. I know that there's lots and lots of irons in the fire, lots of shenanigans. And I do expect much more greater understanding of that when we have our MAS-FPS state conference here at the end of April. Again, the lawyers from Washington, D.C. are going to be there. So that's what I know as of right now. So if you're hearing things like all the funding's getting cut or all the, we're getting huge cuts to the funding or it's not going to be there, those are the things that I know as of right now. And obviously we're going to have to stay tuned, especially when that continuing resolution pans out on September 30th. That would be definitely the time to start looking for what's going to happen with education funding. So that's what I have for right now. So we'll see how things continue to play out. We'll come back and watch this video in a couple months and see how close I was on it. So with that in mind, I think that it is important to start thinking about what are we going to do for next year, both from a funding standpoint and also from a continuous improvement standpoint. Wanted to start off talking about the consolidated application. One of the main things with both on the continuous improvement side and on the funding side is anything that's in our plans, we have to be able to tie those back to our needs. And having just sat through a couple of on-site reviews, I have another on-site review coming up that I'm going to be sitting through. Typically participate in 3 or so on-site reviews every year. And this is always an area that districts struggle with, is to show how they really had stakeholder involvement in developing their needs assessments. And so all of our federal funds, you need to be able to show that you did some sort of assessment to just say, this is what we need. And then you make your plans for how to spend it. And then we figure out what funds are going to be the best match for that. So I really encourage everybody to try to think of it in that order. I know that we've seen that a lot, especially if you have a lot to do with continuous improvement. That's part of the whole MyKIP process, is needs, plans, funds. I really encourage everybody to try to live into that. So needs assessments can look like things that you do in in MyKIP. So the whole data discovery process. I know that a lot of folks look at their data every year, and they look at their budgets every year. And so just really try to think about how can we get people involved in looking at these things, and not just kind of have one person taking care of all of that. Specifically, in the on-site review process, there's requirements if you're, makeover, or excuse me, if you have over a certain dollar amount for Title I, then there's a whole portion on parental involvement, and the parents have to be involved in figuring out how you're going to use that. Title IV is explicit around parents being involved in the decision making around how you're using your Title IV grant. So getting parents involved in that is important. Your annual Title I meeting, when we talk about parental involvement and your Title I plan, sharing the funds at that point, how you're planning to spend it, is always important. So really try to live into that needs, plans, funds cycle. Everything always goes back to, do we need to be spending the money on this? And it's clear that we do. So just make sure that you're documenting that, having good conversations with lots of people around what those needs are, and making sure that it is part of your continuous improvement plan. I'm going to come back to this part on program evaluation versus continuous improvement evaluation after I talk a little bit about continuous improvement. I put this information in my last couple of monthly communications, but I wanted to talk about it here and just see if anybody has any additional questions about it, or if they have additional resources or ways that they do this. A question that I get is, when is our plan due and how do we need to submit it? So kind of for those that have been around for a while, in the assist days, there was a button that you would hit. You'd update your plan every year. You'd hit the submit button. It would actually get submitted. We had to print those plans. We had to attach them to our consolidated application and MEGS Plus at that time. So things are very different now. But the law has never changed. So PA 25 of 1990 is the actual school improvement legislation. We'll open that here in a second. But one of the pieces of it says that we need to be able to make available to the department a copy of our 3 to 5 year school improvement plan no later than September 1 of each year. So when people say, when do we have to have our MyKIP plans updated? When are they due? I always go back to the legislation, and the legislation says that they need to be updated by September 1st. Now, anybody that's worked in MyKIP knows you can update those at any time. You can keep them current. You can make changes to them. You can add things at any time. So there's not like a window, and there's not a submit button. So whatever is in your portfolio is what's live as of that moment. So my recommendation, anytime that anybody's asking about this, they're like, well, when do we have to have our plans updated? We're working on our plans, but they're not done yet. It's June, and so I always go back to the legislation, and that says September 1st. So as we know, there isn't a submit button, so having your plan done just means that whatever is in the portfolio at that time is what's in your plan. Um, Back to this needs plans funds conversation that we were having earlier. I do put in here that really, if our consolidated applications are going to be due on June 30th, which that hasn't been the case for a few years, but that's the typical time that our consolidated applications are due. Then if you want to be tying all of your activities and funding and that sort of thing back to your plan, then really a practical time that you really want to try to have your plans pretty well established is by June 30th, by when you're going to be submitting your consolidated application. So I always talk about the legislative timeline is that it needs to be done by September 1st, but really a practical timeline to really know what your needs are so that you can get your consolidated application updated is that June 30th timeline. Um, so what has to be in the plan? So I'm going to just pop this open. This is the actual legislation. And it's kind of interesting because it's pretty straightforward about what's supposed to be in there. And a lot of it is around um, college and career readiness. So in 2018, I think it was, the Marshall Plan passed. This is under the Snyder administration. And so there was a lot of things about career and career funding and that sort of thing. And they updated PA 25 to include a lot of things about college and career readiness. So this is not long. I really recommend that you do read through this. There's a lot of shalls in here, so it shall include, and it gets into, again, like I mentioned, college and career readiness items, but also things about like improving student learning and that sort of thing. So the sorts of things that are probably already in your plan are there. Probably, but a spot that might be missing is some of that college and career readiness requirements, and those are all shalls. I do recommend that you just kind of take a peek at that, read the legislation. It's not very long, and just see if your plans are aligned with that. Um, in 2024, so as kind of at the well, getting kind of close to this time last year, MDE did put out a memo that said that we are still it still references that PA 25. And then it also kind of makes mention that in order for our plans to be valid, we really need to be monitoring the plans. So MyKIP does have that whole monitoring section of the plan. And so it's really important to continue to use that monitoring section of the plan. Um, and make sure that we're just kind of updating. That's where we put our updated data. That's where we kind of check in to say, here's what we said we were going to do. Did we do it? Are we seeing outcomes? Are we building the capacity of our staff? This memo clarifies that in addition to those pieces that are in PA 25, we also need to be using MyKIP and using the monitoring functions of MyKIP. So those are the sorts of things that really need to be in our plans. I wanted to just kind of check in to see, does anybody feel like they have a really good process for this? Does anybody have any successes to share around either the continuous improvement side or on the consolidated application side? Anybody have any kind of like written things that they'd like to share or just anything verbally to share out? This is the time of year that we really should be thinking about next year. So does anybody feel like they have anything really good going on so that they're prepared that they'd like to share with anybody else? Does anybody have any questions about this? Anything that they want to put out to the group? We have a good group here. We have 60 people. That's a lot of brain power. If anybody's struggling in this area, is there anything specifically that anybody's struggling with that they would like to try to get some help with?
Hi, I am wondering about the career and college readiness and looking for ideas for our K-2 building and also our 3-5 and middle school. So if anyone has any ideas of how they've looked at college and career readiness in those grades, that would be great.
Yeah, I think there seems to be lots of low-hanging fruit at the high school level, right? With EDPs and career tech centers and things like that. So, anybody have anything to share? Elementary, middle school, career stuff? Anybody maybe have any documents that you have prepared, or even just anything verbally, just to share out about what's going on in your district at that elementary or middle school level for college and career?
I can talk. I'm in my first year, but so I'm still learning and just kind of trying to work this through for the first time. But one of the pieces that we recently talked about in one of our district improvement meetings is at the lower levels, just trying to focus some of our energy around like problem solving and productive struggle, and how we've tied that into our core content areas that we have addressed in our plan too. So really, like that collaboration, working as a team, working through higher level thinking questions, things like that.
Yeah, I really like that thought about it's not like, okay, kids, now it's college and career time, but like where does it fit into the things that we're already doing? Yeah, great thoughts. Brooke says in the chat, we created a Google Sheet with the career standards and place what we're doing in each of the grade levels that support the standards. So same sort of thing, right, Brooke? It's not like now it's not career time. It's like, hey, here's the standards and where does that fit into what we're doing? Kim put in a document that provides some suggested activities and with a link. Thanks, Kim. Cassandra says that at middle school they're using Zello. Awesome. Amanda, does that give you a couple of things to work toward?
Yes, thank you so much. That's a lot of good resources. Thank you.
You got it. Any questions from anybody else or anybody looking for any other kinds of resources? All right. So I kind of wanted to wrap up this section by talking about evaluation. So MyKIP does have the monitoring portion built into your portfolio, so you can do some monitoring there. Evaluation of a MyKIP plan doesn't happen officially until your plan is done. So when you say when you're closing out a plan, that's when it takes you through the evaluation section, but that's only going to happen every 3 to 5 years. So I want to talk about the difference between program evaluation and continuous improvement evaluation. I just kind of mentioned the two ways that we evaluate our continuous improvement plans. We do that through the monitoring section, and then when we close out a plan, then you'll have the opportunity to do an official evaluation of it right in MyKIP. But if you were to get an on-site review, and they say, how are you evaluating your federal programs? And you say, well, we do the MyKIP process, that's not going to cut it. So when from a program side of things, when during an on-site review or other times when you're asked how are you evaluating your programs, what they're trying to find out is did you look at the way that you're spending your money? So whether that's PD that you offered, interventionists that you put in place to work with kids, coaches that you might have used Title II to help improve reading instruction. Um, you have to evaluate all the ways that you're spending your funding and just basically ask yourself on an annual basis, was this a good use of our funds? And this is supposed to be completed annually, and we're supposed to think about all the ways that we're spending our federal funds. And this can be a big task if you have lots and lots and lots of programming. So I wanted to share, we have a district here in our county, Muskegon Public, has a lot of complex funding and recently went through an on-site review. And we kind of tried to think about how can we evaluate all of the ways that we're spending our funding on an annual basis. And this is kind of what we came up with. Um, And so basically what we have is um, down the side, we have all the different ways that we're spending our funding. So you can kind of go back to a budget sheet or your consolidated application, and you can kind of pull out all the different ways that we're spending our federal funding. When was the last time we evaluated it? When would we buy it? How much did it cost? What were the different funding sources? So as you can see that several of the things that they use are funded in different ways. Um, and then it kind of gets over to how are we evaluating this? And so for this school, a lot of this stuff we evaluated through our district improvement team process. But other ways that we've done this is you can see here that they used a used a staff evaluation link. We were also thinking that for some of these we might do student evaluations. And then for some of the things, especially like computer programs or things like that, how much did it actually get used by the staff and students? So based on all of that, whether we talked about it through an evaluation process, we had some of the buildings presented on some of their different ways that they're doing that. We collected evaluations through surveys and we looked at usage. So kind of through those 3 or 4 different methods, then we would just kind of come up with this evaluation recommendation. And so on an annual basis, we know all the ways that our funds are being spent. We have a variety of options for how we might want to collect some data around that. And then we said, okay, are we going to renew this? Are we going to go ahead and do this again next year? And that's really what the requirement is you don't have to do the PET program evaluation tool, if you remember that, is something that's still available. But you can't possibly do the PET on all the ways that you're spending your federal funds. And we're supposed to evaluate all the ways that we're spending our federal funds every year. The purpose of which is to say, do we want to continue spending our money this way? We just don't want to get into this place where we're in the habit of, well, we've always spent the money this way, so we're going to continue spending the money this way. And we're supposed to look and say, is this working for us? So this is just an example of one way that you could do that. It certainly isn't the only way, but if this kind of resonates with you, the sample is there with a couple of different ways in there, and then there's a blank template that you could use and modify that however you want to do your evaluation. So, but anybody that's been through an on-site review in the last few years knows that they're going to, for everything that comes across, they're going to say, how did you evaluate this? How did you evaluate? And know that you wanted to continue to spend your funds this way. And then when you get back to that stakeholder involvement, that's another piece. You can use that stakeholder involvement as a part of the evaluation. You know, you can ask the parents, was this beneficial for your students? You can ask the students, did this help you? You can ask the teachers, did this help the kids? Those are all just different things. Just wanted to really point out that there's a difference between program evaluation, deciding how we're going to spend our funding, if it was a good use of our funds, and continuous improvement evaluation, which is are the things that we have in our plan, are they working? Are we seeing a difference for our staff, our kids, our community? So they're 2 very different things. They can definitely work in tandem or they can inform each other. But just don't think that if you're doing the MyKit process, that when it's time for an on-site review or some other sort of program review or audit, when they ask for evaluation and you just hand them your MyKit plan, that's not going to cut it. So just wanted to see if anybody's been through an on-site review recently. How did you do with that section? Does what I just say make sense? And then back to my other question, is anybody struggling with program evaluation and has any questions, or does anybody have something really great that they'd like to share? Has anybody been through an on-site review recently, like either this year or last year? Nobody's getting on-site reviews, huh? All right. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to next item, private schools. February really is the time to get our letters out. I do have some guidance about the letters if you haven't gotten your letters out to private schools. So there's guidance on how to find your private schools. what needs to be in the letters. The MDE webpage has sample letters and those sorts of things. So really now for the next few months is gathering the data from the private schools. So you should get address worksheets. You need to know the grade levels that the students are in, what their addresses are, if they are low income. So you need to know all of that information. So when you get those address sheets, what you're looking for is this address in my school boundaries? And then is this a school that I would serve for Title I? So let's say that you only have Title I at the elementary level, and private high school says that they want to consult about Title I. If your only buildings are Title I buildings are at elementary, then you would not serve that private school for Title I. So that's why you're collecting the grade level. You only serve the only students that generate funding that you can use at the private school are for those in your district boundaries. That's why you're collecting those addresses. And only the students that are low income are generating the funding. And so that's why you're asking if the students are low income. So if a private school says yes, you need to collect all of that information from them so you can determine the funding that might be going to the kids at that school. So all of that detail is all in all these various documents here. So what should we be doing this time of year is getting those address sheets and figuring out the funding for the different private schools, and then setting up consultation meetings. And we just finished a round of compliance and reporting for this last year. And in there was, we talked about this at our last meeting, there was a checkbox that said that you had wet signatures on your consultation documents. So federal guidance says that electronic signatures are allowable, and as long as you have a written process for that, I've shared that before, but we are required to have wet signatures. So your consultation meetings need to be either in person, or if they're held remotely, you're going to need to mail things to people and have them sign it and have them mail it back. I don't personally agree with that because the federal guidance says that we can use electronic signatures, but that is what we are being required to do right now for these consultation documents. So consultations, we should be getting those lined up. There's no real timeline about when that should happen, other than to say you can't really complete your consolidated application until everything is done with your private schools. Anybody that's has probably had some issues with that before, that where you try to do your consolidated application, but you don't have all the detail from the private schools, and then that's going to throw your whole application off. So real practical deadline is make sure you have all your consultations done before you try to complete your consolidated application. I have a couple of questions here in the chat that got sent to me personally. Let me take a peek here. Someone was asking about, does the LEA upload private school responses to GEMS this year, even if they have no one taking part? There was some reporting that was due in February around that. And there was a spot in there to check if you had no private schools, you still needed to upload sample letters. So if you still have questions about that at the end of the meeting, I'd be glad to stick around afterward for the person that sent that to me. Tara asked, where can we locate an address sheet? So I'm going to put a new link here in. Oops, that's not the right spot. Give me 1 second here. So this is a web page that I maintain for our, we run a consortium for our private schools, but it has links to all the documents that that you could use. So Tara, I'm going to drop this in the chat. So on here, so what's required for the private schools, they need is one, they fill out the enrollment worksheets. So you can just download or add this to your drive. It's right here, enrollment worksheets. just make sure that you change some of the language in it because it says return to Dave Hunt by such and such a date. So if you're going to use any of the documents, just make sure you do a little editing on them. And then as far as our private school, this private schools also need to give you an improvement plan because anything that we do needs to be tied to a needs assessment and their improvement plan. So I have samples and documents that the private schools can use for that too. So if somebody says I need to, that yes, they want to consult, they have three requirements really. They need to fill out the address worksheet, they need to do their needs assessment, and they need to provide you with their improvement plan. It does not have to be in this format. So a lot of private schools have their own improvement plan process and things like that. They can just give you whatever they have. It does not have to be in this format, but if they don't have something, then here's some examples and pieces that you can use. Tara, does that get you pointing in the right direction? Great. Any other questions about private schools, what we should already be done with at this point, and what next steps are for working with our private schools that indicated they want to consult?
Just a quick question around that. So timing wise, if would you say a spring conversation or a summer conversation?
Definitely a spring conversation
Yeah.
because you'll need to know what goes into your consolidated application. So the private school section has its own piece in the consolidated application.
Thank you.
You got it.
So we only meet with private schools one time a year.
There's two times that you need to meet officially with them. One is this time when we're consulting and figuring out what we're going to put into the consolidated application for our June 30th submission. And then we also have to consult with them a second time at the amendment time because we'll have carryover, we'll have new allocations, things like that. And so we also need to meet with them a second time. And there's two signature spots on the consultation document, one for the initial consultation this time of year and one for the amendment time, so that November, December timeframe.
Thank you.
You got it.
Also, when I send out letters and I don't hear back from the school, I've tried calling, nobody answers the phone. Like, how much trying do I have to do before I'm finished?
So you really just need to show that you made a good effort. So if you sent the letter and there was no response, you followed up with an email, for example, and there was no response, and you made a call and no one's calling you back, then I think that is totally adequate. You
So
don't
I
need
just
to.
need to document that somewhere.
Yep. Yep. So
Okay.
I always just have a spreadsheet that has all the private schools that I need to contact in it. And then I just have a couple of columns in the spreadsheet for when did I send it? Did I send a follow-up email? Did I make a follow-up call? And that's always been adequate. You do not need to send things certified mail. You don't need to drive to the private school and knock on the door. I think if you've sent a letter, emailed, and made phone calls, I think that's totally adequate. I would say that you might owe them at least one phone call because they get lots of letters and they get lots of emails this time of year for this. And so I think just saying that you sent a letter and then sent a follow-up email, somebody might give you a hard time for that and say, well, you didn't call them. So I would say maybe at least one phone call would be beneficial.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question on this? Normally, there's a site that shows all the private nonprofits that may be in your area.
Yeah.
Do you have a site readily offhand? I mean, I just know I go in I've heard 5 miles, I've heard 10 miles, I've
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
I saw the boundaries.
So it's
I know there's this.
yeah, it's the EEM. So that's linked here, and you do the geographical search in the EEM. So that's under, let's see, data sets, I think. Nope. Where is it at? Search, geographical. There we go. So you come in here and you just check private schools, or sorry, non-public schools. And what you want to do is, well, one, it doesn't matter how many miles away. If they're in your district boundaries, then they need to get the letter. So you might have a huge district, and they're 30 miles away from your central office or something. If they're in your school district, then you need to send them a letter. And then the rule of thumb that we get from, because we're supposed to find kids no matter where they are. So they could be going to a private school 100 miles away, and if they said they wanted to consult, we need to consult with them. So the rule of thumb that we get from the Office of Educational Supports is we need to look within 25 miles of our district boundaries. And so typically what I do is, you see there's not 25-mile radius on here. I do 30, and then I just put in my district office address. And so it'll search and it'll return you with all non-public schools within 30 miles of whatever address you put in your district office, for example. And then that will give you a good starting point about where to go from there. And
Thank you.
that whole process is outlined in this quick start guide right here. Any other questions about private schools? I know this part can be a little tricky or confusing. All right, if anything else comes up, you can always bring it up at roundtable. Okay, wanted to move on to state grants. I want to start off by talking about 31A. And I was working with some districts recently, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we got so much more 31A dollars than we used to, and we get way more 31A than we do for Title I now." And so this all goes back to this idea about opportunity index bands. And so I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of background knowledge about this and how it works. The idea kind of came out of there was a school finance research project that was done a few years ago, and it was trying to think about how can we more equitably fund our schools than what is currently happening. So we have the foundation allowance, and some people get much more than the foundation allowance. Some people get the lowest possible amount. Every district in our county gets the base foundation allowance piece, and it all kind of goes back to Proposal A, which was all the way back in the 1990s. Anyway, this group got together and made some recommendations and said, really, our how we're funding our schools should be based on things other than just the foundation grant. And so this idea of opportunity index bands was raised, and where that's getting applied right now is to 31A. So they're using 31A as kind of an equalizer. So schools that get real high foundation sometimes don't get any 31A at all, or they get much less 31A. And the opportunity index bands are based completely on your free and reduced lunch counts. So there's some I did link the legislation, and I always try to give you the legislation because that's the spot that I always go to look for things. And then on the MDE state aid payment webpage, there is the very last item here. It says at-risk estimate. And this is where you actually get your 31A estimates every year. You can't go to the program allocations page and get your 31A estimates. It'll tell you past years for 31A, but it's not going to give you an estimate like all of our other grants. So you have to go to the state aid payment webpage, and this last item here is an at-risk estimate. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. And I'll open this up in Excel. Well, if I'd been thinking ahead, I would already had it open, so I didn't have to wait for it to open. But here we are. All right. So I know that this is all like tiny on here, so bear with me though. What this does is it says how many, what was your economically disadvantaged count? What was your total count or membership? So that's like your FTE. And then what's a percentage? And you'll see that your opportunity index score is basically your economically disadvantaged percentage. And so then they use that opportunity index score to give it a certain weight, and then it tells you your amount that you're going to get. So the higher your opportunity index score, the more funding you're going to get. And it puts it into certain bands, which we're going to talk about here in a second. So you can always open this up and see what your estimated 31A amount is going to be for the year. And you can also look to see how much was it last year. So this N through S section is prior year. That's what that PY means, prior year. And so you can see, oh, how were things last year? What's my estimate for this year? And so this is what you can use to help budget out your 31A. But if you're wondering about like, well, what band am I in, and how close are we to either moving down a band or an upper band, look here and see what your opportunity index score is. And then I pulled the index bands out of the legislation. So this is just linked down at the bottom of our agenda. So if you have an opportunity index score of 0 to 19, you're in band 1, which means that you're going to get the minimal funding. If you have an opportunity index score of 85 or greater, that puts you in band 6, and that means you're going to get the most funding possible. So if you're wondering what band you're in, then you just come find your district, find your opportunity index score, and then look at where that score is in the band. So let's say that you're a 73, which puts you into band 5. Well, if your economically disadvantaged count goes down a little bit next year, you might bump back into band 4, which is going to have a negative implication for your funding. So I think it's important to understand this piece and kind of pay attention to where you are. And this really, if you guys have been to any of my meetings before, you know I hammer this pretty hard. You have to, even with our community eligibility for free meals or universal free breakfast, free lunch for all students, we still have to identify the students that are economically disadvantaged. And so you really need to stay on top of sending home the eligibility forms and really trying to get those back, because it does have an impact on your 31A funding. Your 31A funding is directly tied to your economically disadvantaged count, and then it's also more indirectly tied on these opportunity index bands. So every time that I talk to somebody about this, they're like, we stopped doing our free and reduced lunch forms when we moved to community eligibility, or we stopped doing it when we moved to universal meals. And you are probably leaving $31A on the table if you do that. So it's definitely something that we need to stay on top of. I would just check on your own systems. Are you still collecting those eligibility forms annually and does everybody understand the importance of collecting those? Because I think, again, people are like, yeah, well, we send the forms home, but we're not really following up like we used to because all the kids get free meals anyway. So that will impact your 31A funding. So I really recommend everybody really checks their system on that, and then take a look at what opportunity index band you're in and what kind of impact that has for your funding. You know, if you were able to identify just a handful more students, is that going to put you in a higher band and then therefore help you out with more funding? So take a look at that and see where you might fall with that, and check your systems on how you're doing with collecting eligibility forms. Any questions about that before I have one other item for 31A, but any questions about opportunity index bands, funding, how 31A funding's developed, where you can find how much money you're getting? It's a little bit different because it's not on the program allocations page like the rest of our grant funding. Okay, last item that I want to talk about with 31A is the differences between identification and services. So I regularly get questions from my Muskegon ISD constituents around like count periods and things like that. They're like, do I have to go in and mark everything that all the services that the kids are getting and that sort of thing? And so the way that I explain 31A is there's two things that we have to pay attention to. One is, are we identifying all of the students that are at risk? And so this list that I have on the screen now shows all the different ways that students can be identified. And some of these are automatically marked by MDE. Some of them may automatically get marked by your student information system if you have some things built into whatever you're using for your student information system. But I wanted to talk about this identification here for a minute. no matter how many items are marked for a student, the only thing that gets reported to MDE is that's called the term, are they 30, 60 in MSDS, which means that they're marked as at risk. So let's say that somebody was economically disadvantaged, chronically absent, and had a family history of school failure. That's important for us to know. MDE does not get all that data. So even though you might be collecting all that information and maybe even entering it in your student information system, this data does not get reported to MDE. All they're going to see is that student should be marked as 30/60. They're going to be marked as at risk. And so they do that for accountability purposes, not for funding, not for anything else. So when we're identifying our kids, it's not doing anything for our funding. And if we're checking all the boxes, it's not doing anything for MDE. If one box is checked, they're 30/60. If all 10 of the boxes are checked, they're 30/60. They're not any more or less 30/60 in the eyes of MDE. So why do we do this identification? We're supposed to do that identification for us. So the reason we're filling out these identification worksheets is for us to evaluate what kind of services might these students need, what students might need help from 31A, and in what areas. And I think that people use this or see this as more of a compliance activity, and MDE does not care. They're not looking and seeing how many students didn't achieve proficiency, and those sorts of things. They're not looking at these and making any kind of decision making or funding you any differently. We're supposed to collect this for our purposes so that we know who are the students that we're supposed to be serving, and then using this as part of our needs assessment to say what kind of things should we be putting in place for our kids, and then who should we be putting into those programs. That is why the worksheets exist. It's not for compliance purposes for MDE, because anything marked on here just gets the student marked as 30/60 at risk. So Stacy says they'll ask for the worksheets. Absolutely, because they want to see that you collected the data and you're supposed to be acting on it. But again, the reason to fill this out isn't so that we can identify them for MDE. They're there for us so that we can make sure that we have the right programming in place and the right kids are getting put into that programming. So for all MDE cares, there could be just a button that says, is a student at risk? And that's because that's all that gets reported. So when you're filling the worksheets out, when you're doing those sorts of things, just know you're not doing that for MDE. You're doing that for your own internal purposes of how should we be spending our $31A dollars and what kids should be getting those services. That's the identification side. Okay. Then there is the services side. And so we also need to be tracking what services the students received, because we need to fill out the annual program fiscal report each year, and that is done on July 5th. It's due July 15th of each year. I really, really recommend working on this throughout the year and not just waiting until June or July to work on it, because many of the people that will know about this, for example, maybe you funded a counselor to help with attendance, improve some students' attendance, and they had a caseload of students that they were working with. Well, if you wait until July to try to identify those students, that counselor is going to be sitting on a beach someplace and isn't going to be able to give you the information. So make sure that you're throughout the year paying attention to this, identifying the kids that are getting these services. So you need to provide an unduplicated count. You need to say how many students are getting served in each of those areas, how many of those students were free and reduced lunch, and how much money the district spent to do that. So this whole annual program fiscal report can be pretty daunting if you wait till the last minute to work on it. So it requires you really knowing how all your 31A dollars are being spent, what students are benefiting from all of those things, and then coordination with the business office to say, okay, here's where the money was spent. Here's how many students were served there, what grade levels were they in, were they free and reduced lunch? So it's quite a paper chase. And so I recommend working on this throughout the year. I try to work on it each count period, just like I do the identification. So each count period, we're doing identification. And then I really recommend each count period also tracking where your services are for all of your students, because that APFR can be a bear to fill out, especially if you're not staying on top of it throughout the year. For our county, we track all of our services in PowerSchool. So we use PowerSchool in our county. And so we have a way to track all of those services in PowerSchool. And then at the end of the year, it generates a report for us. So I have some separate spreadsheets. If you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how I should track all of this stuff, just stick around and ask me afterward or send me a private message. I can send you I have some tracking sheets that you can use. So Amanda says, is this the reason we have teachers write the names of the students they work with on their PARs? That's definitely one way that you could do that, Amanda. Another reason that you might be doing that in your district, I'm not sure if I just did a members only session for MAS FPS on time and effort. For time and effort, if they're maintaining PARs, they also need to maintain some backup documentation about who they worked with. And so it sounds like maybe at your district, you're just kind of putting that all in one spot. So you did the PARs and you also included the students that they worked with. And then that would take care of the time and effort side on the federal piece, but also any fiscal or program audits where they said, well, okay, so they said they spent this percentage, but who did they actually work with? So you might be kind of killing two birds with one stone with that, and that's why you're putting the students. I think it might be worth asking Amanda if somebody is if that they're additionally using that for the annual program fiscal report. Any other questions about 31A in any way, shape, or form before we move on to a couple of other items? All right. This next piece is about the dyslexia law and some of the funding that is going along with that. And this was made by our ELA consultant here at MAISD, and I thought it was pretty beneficial and wanted to share it here. We have PA 146, that's that K-12 literacy law. That's where all the read by grade 3 law stuff is. It's where the dyslexia law stuff is. It's all in this PA 146. And then there's also separate grants like 35M, 35N that are there and are complementary to that and maybe funding some of the items in it. But there are some misconceptions around what is in what area and who's going to be taking care of what tasks. And the source for this is a video that Denisha Rawls-Smith did with the Michigan State Board of Education. And that's where they kind of talk about and compare 35M and PA 146. And so this is a summary of that. The actual link to the video is right there. And the recommendation, if this is something that you really want to know the details on, is to start watching at 1 hour and 30 minutes and watch till about the 2-hour mark. So for about a half hour, but this is a summary of that half hour that Denisha did with the State Board of Education. So I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I just wanted to put this out there because I know that despite the webinars that have been held, and different other opportunities, I think there's still a lot of questions around this and like what are the timelines and when are things going to come out and who's doing that and how's it going to get published and can we spend the money before then? And so I don't have the answers to all of those things, but I did want to share this resource because I thought it was really helpful when I read it. But I will say that there's still some unanswered questions and still some things that seem a little contradictory. And so I'm just trying to pay attention to all the things that are coming out about all these different things. So if anybody here feels like a mega expert in this, maybe you can speak up in roundtable and help set some of us straight. Wanted to talk about 23G. We had to do some reporting last year. It was pretty straightforward, was not real difficult. We just had to say who the students were and what allowable activity from 23G they participated in. So this is the My Kids Back on Track reporting. We had to put things in our My Kid plans around this. And then the legislation had very detailed requirements around what they needed from a monitoring standpoint. I've never seen anything like that in legislation before. And I thought that the reporting that we had to do last year was quite easy compared to what I saw in the legislation. So I'm a little concerned about this year if there's going to be more reporting. There's a webinar on that coming up. I'm going to be attending that webinar, and I'll make sure that I put details in my monthly communication. But that webinar is coming up on April 15th. So I anticipate that I know for sure we're going to have to do some reporting on this. I anticipate that it'll be due before the end of the year. I'm not sure what's going to be in it, if it's going to be as quote unquote easy as it was last year, or if it's going to need to start pulling in some more of the legislative requirements. So I did put the link in there. The registration for that webinar is right here on that link. I'm going to be attending it, and I'll make sure that I communicate about that in my monthly communication. The last state grants thing that I want to talk about was 27H. So this is that mentoring and induction grant. So there was some legislation passed that it's required that all new teachers or teachers new into the position at the district receive mentoring. Also, counselors and administrators. It's not just principals, it's administrators. And so they did, there was some funding available for that. And so I linked in a couple of resources for that. I linked the legislation as always, and then the program website has a lot of really great information on it, including a sample application. So you can look at the application and maybe complete the whole application in the Word document, or you could turn it into a Google Doc, and then you can kind of just copy that over once you get into the system. But the application is in Nexus. It is open now, and it is due next Thursday by 5 p.m. in Nexus. They do have office hours today at 3 o'clock. And the link to the office hours Zoom is right here on where it says Wednesday, March 19th, 3 p.m. So just click that link if you want to go to that webinar. Click that link at 3 o'clock today. I know that we're really encouraging all of our districts to apply for this. We're trying to pull some data together for them and give them some sample items, and also let them know everything that at our ISD that they could participate in. I looked at the application. It's not super difficult, but there is quite a bit of narrative responses that are in there. I want to say there's 3 or 4 different narratives that need to be completed, and there is a budget section to complete a preliminary budget for how you want to use those funds. So definitely not something to wait until Thursday at 3 o'clock to start. If it's something that you're going to want to apply for, I recommend going to the office hours today, and then make sure you set aside some time between now and a week from tomorrow to get that done. That was all that I had for the state grants. Didn't see any questions popping up in the chat. So I think I'm just going to move on to the resources, and then we can do roundtable. These are 2 resources that I put in at each of our meetings. We have the MDE State Grants Repository. That's where I was able to get quite a bit of information about some of the items above. And then James runs the Kent ISD Grant Alerts newsletter. Highly recommend that you subscribe to that. Very comprehensive resource. I think, James, I might not have got your most recent one in there. Sorry about that. I think that might be from last time, but the subscription button still works. So I really recommend subscribing to James's newsletter. It's excellent. And he just sends that once a month. And then as far as spring workshop, so this is our last quarterly meeting that we have. The final meeting of the year is to make sure you go to the spring workshop. So I listed what is known right now. I just knew the ones that are happening over here on the west side of the state. If you're here from another part of the state, I'm sure that there's some happening in your area also. There's typically several virtual options available. These that are listed here are all in person. So we're going to be talking about updates to the Nexus platform. There's going to be some changes to the language acquisition plans. And then there are changes to out-of-state conference forms and private school conference forms. So those are just a few of the items that are going to be on the agenda for this year. I think that this is always really, really good PD. They typically run from like 9 to noon. And it's pretty much required attendance. So make sure you're keeping your eyes open for either a live one that's in your area, or make sure you attend the virtual session for it. And the last item on my list here is I mentioned a few times this Spring Professional Learning Institute from MES FPS is April 24th and 25th, so that's right around the corner. I'm the co-chair for the Professional Learning Committee. Amber is here today. She's on the Professional Learning Committee. So we have a really, truly great conference plan this year. I mean, price of admission is probably worth it just to come for the federal updates. So that is a half day on the first day. But we also have MDE will be there and talking about common findings for on-site reviews. The fiscal office will be there and we'll be talking about common findings for fiscal reviews. And then we have breakout sessions that help to address all of those common findings. And Kevin Walters will be there and talking about ESSER closeout, but also state response to some of the federal grant situations. And we'll also be hearing from MyLeap. So really very, it's going to be a great conference, super timely, and I hope that everybody can join us. Registration is there. The events at a glance for all the other MES FPS stuff is there. MES FPS membership is just $85 a year, and we do several members only sessions. I mentioned earlier we did the time and effort members only session last week. Highly recommend if you're not part of MES FPS that you go ahead and get signed up and make sure that you join us at the conference here 24th and 25th. It's kind of the only PD opportunity other than us getting together quarterly here that you have in the state. MES FPS is kind of the place to go. So yes, I am on the MES FPS board and feel very passionate about it, but I don't know how I would have been able to do my job without being a part of the organization. So hopefully you'll consider getting involved. All right, with that, I want to move into roundtable. This is really just anything that anybody wants to talk about, anything that was on the agenda today that you wanted more detail on, anything that you're working on right now that you're having trouble with that you wanted to see if anybody else is in the same spot. If you have any great resources that have been created recently that you wanted to share, I know we put a bunch in the chat today. This is the time to just kind of open it up and see if we can't get some answers or some thinking from the group.
David, you mentioned earlier in our conversation that if you do not have private schools that participate, there was still somewhere that we were supposed to upload letters. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, let's see if I can pull that up real quick. Let's see, I think I had the link to that in our last agenda. Yep. So I believe even though the deadline is passed on this, I think it's still open and available. Yep. So I'm going to drop this in the chat. So I know this came up for a couple people because I got some private messages around it. So if you didn't complete this reporting, I would head right to this link here that I just put in the chat. You can just open it as a guest. You don't need to log in or anything like that. I'll show you right where to go. So you can scroll all the way down to the bottom. And then it says create new documentation of private school consultation submission 24-25. So you click that. And then fill out the top. And then this is where you can just say if you documentation of private school consultation for every private school receiving services, leave it blank. In the comments, just say there were no participating private schools. Okay, and then down here, You click these assurances, and then in the bottom, then you can put in this is where you still have to do these and upload samples of what you would send for in district or out of district. And then you can click here, there are no private schools within the district boundaries. And again, you could just say, if you probably don't have to, but you could say something about that there weren't any private schools that participated. But this is where you put the samples of letters that you either did send or would send. And you can get those sample letters from the MDE webpage. So they're right here, sample in district, sample out of district. But yes, you do have to complete that reporting even if nobody participated.
Thank you. And is that example of last year's letters or this year's letters?
They're just generic letters, so
Okay.
they don't change.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, you got it. Stephanie pointed out that the spring workshop at Ionia is Wednesday, May 28th, 25. So if you're in that area, go ahead and mark your calendar. Dana said that would be really interested in 23G ideas. Anybody have anything to share around 23G? Maybe any documentation you've created or just verbally to share out? Dana, could you maybe give a little bit more detail about what you're looking for? Is it like things with students or ways to document the things, like what, maybe give a little bit more information?
Sure. So we, we submitted our grant and our principal had written in a lot of, like tutoring, having our teachers tutor on their lunches, for compensation, things like that. Well, we didn't get a lot of teacher buy-in, so we need to amend, but we're just looking for ideas on a way to spend it that maybe other districts have, had approved. I mean, to me, it's kind of a tough one to get approved. So if anybody has any like big ticket items that they have had approved, we would be all ears on that.
We had the same problem here. We started those programs in our grant application, and they just weren't supported throughout the buildings. So we are taking advantage of the fact that it is extended through 2027, September 2027. We're running summer school programs out of them, and we are going to be charging our literacy coaches to those for the next few years.
Thank you.
I will add that we had included a math interventionist for our middle school students. So we have 2 teachers who are doing math intervention with very specific students. And that was, so, it wasn't tutoring per se, it was an actual class. So that was a big chunk that we were able to use with those funds.
So is that like a position that you could potentially shift to at risk after these funds go away?
I feel the answer to that would be yes. We had funded it with ESSER originally, and then obviously ESSER went away. So then we shifted it to 23G. And then the thought process is that once 23G is used up, we would move it over to at risk. And I see, it looks like David nodding his head. Yes, maybe. So it sounds like he maybe agrees.
Yeah, we tried to, we created a couple behavioral interventionist positions with the intention to fund through at risk. And I inquired about 23G and they said, no, we can't use those in that. So. Thank you.
We were able to secure funding for our STEAM labs. And materials for hands-on learning.
Thanks.
With ours for summer school, not only did we get the programming and the staffing, but we were also able to put our summer school transportation in there as well.
Thank you, Angela.
All great ideas. Thank you.
All right, what else for roundtable? Trying to capture everything everybody's talking about in the notes here.
Dave, I'm sorry, this is probably a question more from ignorance than anything else. The 27H funding. Is that for teachers who've shifted from one building to the other? Maybe shifted a grade level or a role, they're new to the building, or is that for brand new to education teachers or teachers who are new to our district from another district? Like, what does that?
Yep. So
who counts, I guess, if I'm trying to make a case for it?
Yeah, my understanding is it's for sure new to the profession. So within kind of targeting maybe that first 3 years new to profession. But it's also there is provisions in it for new to your district. And then on an administrator side, it would be new to the position. So let's say somebody's been in your district forever, but they just moved up and now they're a principal, then it's targeted for them, or somebody moved into being a curriculum director, those sorts of things. So even though they've been in the district or they've been in education forever, they're new to that specific position, that new administrative position.
Thank you. So new to the position would be for folks who are in administrative. Teaching would be new to the district.
Yep, or new to the profession.
Thank you. Oh, cool. Shannon, thank you for the link.
Hey, David, just to kind of piggyback on that 27H that he was just referring to. I think you had mentioned something about contracting, and I'm just looking at the grant, contracting with one or more established state professional organizations.
Yes.
Provide mentoring. What does that look like? And is it not that the school's providing it, you're having to contract with someone else, or?
Yeah, so and I'm not prepared to share some specific items on this, but I know that professional organizations like MASSP and MEMSPA are putting together contracted positions so that if like let's say that for new principals your district is not set up or prepared or your ISD can't help with it. You can for sure use those 27H funds to contract with, say, an MASSP or an MASFPS to provide mentoring for those staff.
Could you still do your own if there's like a mentoring program already set up within an ISD or
Yes.
local, can they use that, or is it mandatory that they contract out?
It is not mandatory. So if you have your own program, then you can use that for stipends or materials or, those sorts of things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, David, this is Stacy. I was trying to put it in the chat. MDE, and if this has been said, I'm sorry, I stepped away, has a webinar today at 3 p.m. regarding 27H. And I went to a meeting yesterday that briefly talked about it, and they said that you should not look at doing in-house programs that you're already running because there is supplanting provisions with the 27H. So if you already provide mentor stipends, we were told that you could not use it for that.
Good point. I do, and just in case anybody else missed it, I do have the link to the webinar today at 3 o'clock. It's right on the program website right here. All right. I see Miranda has a question. Can anyone confirm if ESSER Cross-Act reporting is based on spending through 6/30/24 or 9/30/24? Ooh, anybody have that detail? I sure don't.
Well, everything I turned in for reporting purposes was through 6/30/24, and I have not heard gotten anything back saying I need to change anything through 9:30:24. So I'm going to assume it's 6:30:24.
We also reported through 6:30:24.
So Miranda, if you are worried about that at all, I would email Kevin Walters directly about that. It sounds like the consensus is that 6:30, but if you are still really wondering about it, I know Kevin would respond. I'll put his email in the roundtable section. All right, so we talked about private schools, 23G, 27H, ESSER. Anything else from anybody?
Quick question on 35M. The stuff that has come out for that grant has primarily been focused about them committee or putting together the committee, but then there's been information about local education agencies applying for that. Is there a second funding piece that's specific to maybe the curriculum that PA 146 is going to put out?
I don't want to misspeak on this. Anybody else have some information? Stephanie, will you write that question in the chat, and then let me see if I can find an answer to that.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, I'm not hearing any other questions pop up, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and just end the meeting at this point. I plan to stick around till 10:30, so if there's anything anybody wants to continue talking about once the meeting wraps up, I'll be here for another 10 minutes or so.